The Ford Falcon, a name that gives one a picture of roaring engines, blurring speed, and spirit that just cannot be killed. But today, we're answering the big question. Are you ready to pay your hard-earned cash for it? Whether you're looking at one of the 1970s legends or the last FGX XR8 that signified the end of the Falcon run in 2016, we're going to pull apart every piece. That's why we'll touch all the bases, starting from the raw power of the 8-cylinder engines and finishing with car culture, where the legend resides, and several nuances that should be discussed. Before we start, please don't forget to subscribe, as it helps us to reach more gearheads. Now, let's get into it. First things first, let's begin with something like a brief background. The first time the Ford Falcon was launched to the market in 1960, nobody had expected it to turn into a performance machine that it is today. Ford needed a sturdy, inexpensive car for the family, a car that did not require any frills and thrills for the buyer. However, not unlike with any legendary tale, events changed, and the outcome can be easily guessed. The Falcon developed to cater for the ever-growing appetite for big block muscle cars in late 60s and early 70s. The change was monumental, from an economy car to a muscle-fisted tank that could take almost anything on the road with it. Now, when we're talking Falcons, we have to mention the 1971 Ford Falcon XY GTHO Phase 3. This was the car that solidified the Falcon's status as a muscle car icon. Under that long hood was a 351 cubic inch Cleveland V8 engine. While Ford officially rated it at 300 horsepower, real-world numbers were closer to 380. And this car was fast, ridiculously fast for its time. 0 to 60 in just 6.4 seconds and a quarter mile in 14.4 seconds. Think about that for a second. This was the early 70s. The Falcon was hitting speeds that could rival today's sports cars. Creating the fastest car was not the only thing that made the Falcon special. It was also much more than a speedster in the straight line. Unlike most American muscle cars of that time that were affairs of a few wraps wide and not any good going around curves, the Falcon could obscenely change directions. It had a reasonably even weight distribution and a much more complex suspension system, which suggested that this was a car that could perform not only a decent drag strip time, but also could run round the bends, challenging competition race cars. That flexibility was unique about it. Oh yes, of course, it made a nice cultural statement. One of the most memorable uses of the Ford Falcon would have to be in the Mad Max franchise. The Black Interceptor, used by the protagonist himself to chase other cars, was a 1973 Ford Falcon XB GT. This car was used as a representation of the rebel icon, survivalist icon, and the final icon of the movie. You might know that Mad Max's iconic pursuit special was a Ford Falcon XB GT, but here's what makes it even cooler. When the filmmakers were putting together Max's black-on-black supercharged Interceptor, they had almost no budget. They modified a second-hand Falcon with custom parts from junkyards and scrap metal. That Frankenstein creation would go on to become one of the most famous movie cars of all time, an unintentional icon born from cinematic ingenuity. And the Interceptor's global fame made the Falcon XB an instant cult classic worldwide. In other Mad Max movies, the Falcon graduated to an embodiment of Australian muscle cars, something of their own which they could pit against the American behemoths like the Mustang and Camaro. But that's not where the story ends. Fast forward to the early 2000s, we're talking about cars like the Ford Falcon BA XR6 Turbo. Now, this car shook up the performance sedan market in a way no one saw coming. Ford threw in a turbocharged 4.0-liter inline-six engine, giving this sedan some serious bite. It wasn't a V8, but it didn't need to be. The XR6 Turbo could hit 0 to 60 in just under 6 seconds. Many people were modifying these engines to easily hit 400 to 500 horsepower. It was a tuner's dream car, practical, affordable, and insanely quick. Then came the final chapter. In 2016, Ford Australia produced the last Falcon, the FGX XR8. This car came as the final salute to a long history, equipped with a 5.0-liter supercharged V8. This was a detuned version of the Miami V8 engine from the Ford Mustang GT, pushing 536 horsepower. It had a 0 to 60 time of around 4.9 seconds and could do the quarter mile in a staggering 12.6 seconds. For a car that could comfortably seat 5 people and carry groceries in the boot, that's insane. Ford wanted to give the Falcon a proper send-off. They did just that. But before you start dreaming, let's discuss the pros and cons of having an affair. Throwing a lot of money to own a Falcon is not all about going at high speeds in the car. They also like to give some negative features which are quite real and mainly affect real old models. If there's one thing that is a nemesis to the Falcon, it has to be rust. As you will be likely to find when searching for rust, you will find it easiest to find around the floor pans, boot, and the wheel wells, because once it gets into the metal, it's next to impossible to get out. Just like most vintage cars, especially the Falcons, it can be a real headache locating some parts for the early models. There's a firm aftermarket support, but as we all know, it takes a whole lot of effort to find genuine spare parts. And it doesn't stop there. Falcons are large cars. That's why the usual shock absorbers, breakages, and tires are to be expected to wear out much faster. Although the newer models may not be as rusty as the older ones, it is expensive to maintain, particularly when considering high-end vehicles like the XR8 or XR6 Turbo. So, should you still buy one? Let's get into that. It is well known that there's nothing like an old car that reminds you of childhood. When looking for a classic car, then a vintage Falcon car is going to do that every time you start the car. However, the idea of owning a classic car is not for the faint at heart. That requires a lot of dispensable cash on hand, time, and the ability to work on your car on the weekends. If that sounds like fun to you, then in its European and American form, such as the XY GT or even the XA or XB, could be just the thing. At the same time, if a more contemporary form and a little bit more modern reliability is needed, but you still want to have Falcon legacy, it is FG models. Whether people are looking for an all-around car with superior performance, comfort, and mod capability, however, the best bet would be the FG XR6 Turbo. What's more, it quickens the process, fun, and definitely you would not have to bother if it rusts or where to get some of those special parts, as can be seen in the linked videos. Also, there are quite a number of people who own the SC's XR6 and XR8, so you will not be lonely if you want to paint or do something out of the ordinary on your car. Let's be honest though, if you're purchasing a Ford Falcon for your daily driver, then you probably are an idiot. Cars are actually the reason you are buying them, like the noise, the rumble of a V8 starting up from under the hood, the challenge of taking a car with some sort of character and giving it a proper run. The Falcon isn't only a car, but perhaps the last of its kind which people still remember and try to preserve. Now, if you're still not convinced, let me tell you this. What is worth in Falcons, particularly the high-performance models, the value is only set to rise. For these qualities, the desire for such cars will only increase with time. There will be a decreasing number of them on the road. Basically, Hastings got his hands on a clean GTHO Phase 3 or a GT XR6 Turbo is not a car you will purchase, but an investment. But here's the catch. The opportunity this window provides won't remain open for long. Just as these cars become scarce, costs are going to skyrocket. Should you want to own a Falcon, then this is the best time to do it. But let me tell you, having the original one of these monuments is a completely different story from the feeling one gets driving a conventional car. The noise, the texture, the bond you achieve driving, it's something that cannot be bought. In the end, the Ford Falcon is more than worth your money if you value performance, history, and the feeling of owning a true icon. Whether it's a vintage model that gives you that raw, unfiltered driving experience or a newer FG XR8 that combines modern comfort with muscle car heritage, the Falcon delivers. You just have to be willing to put in the work and embrace the ride, because the Falcon isn't just a car, it's a lifestyle. So, what do you think? Is the Falcon still on your wish list, or are you ready to start your search for one? Let us know in the comments below. Are you Team GTHO or Team XR6 Turbo? And if you like this deep dive into the ultimate Ford Falcon review, leave your thoughts in the comments below, give it a thumbs up, and please make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss our next episode in the Muscle Car Vault.